Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Attorney Matias Monica G. Palu-ay, and this would be sales law. And for reference, I would recommend that when you study sales law, you read the book of Hector de Leon. I actually have it here with me, beside me. It's here. I'll show it to you. This is the copy that I have. But this one's a very old copy. It's a copy which I used even back when I was still in law school. And I think this was the same book that my brother used when he studied law or college, and that was maybe more than 10 years ago. The thing with the sales law is that it's not it's the provisions of the sales law in the civil code has not been amended, so it's still okay to use this as a reference. And there are other provisions which were added by virtue of special laws, but the civil code provision per se was never amended. So this is the subject, sales law, and that's me. We go to the next slide, and the next slide discusses all the chapters in the book on the law on sales. So it's divided into 10 chapters. You have chapter 1, the nature and form of the contract, chapter 2, the capacity to buy or sell, chapter 3, effects of the contract when the thing sold has been lost, and the obligations of the vendor. The vendor is the seller, okay? And then chapter 5, you go the obligations of the vendee. The vendee is the buyer. Chapter 6 is actions for breach of contract of sale of goods. So if the other party breaches or does not perform his obligation, what are your causes of action against that person? Chapter 7 talks about the extinguishment of a sale. And Chapter 8, assignment of credit and other incorporeal rights. Chapter 9, general provisions. And Chapter 10 would be barter and exchange. So for today, we will just be discussing Chapter 1. So this is the first lecture, and this is found in Article 1458 to Article 1461. Chapter 1 talks about the nature and the form of a contract. So in Article 1458, it provides that by the contract of sale, one of the contracting parties obligates himself to transfer the ownership of and to deliver a determinate thing, and the other to pay the price certain in money or its equivalent. So when you read it, it's quite a mouthful actually, but when you study law, you should always read it by segments, okay? So the secret to becoming a lawyer would be just read it one word at a time, one phrase at a time, one sentence at a time, and one paragraph at a time, one page at a time. So you have to take baby steps. Alright? So here, in order for us to better understand it, we have to read it by segments. Okay? So by the contract of sale, one of the contracting parties obligates himself to transfer the ownership of and to deliver a determinate thing. So if you're talking about the contract of sale, there are two parties here. That's the buyer and the seller. So in this case, one of the contracting parties obligates himself to transfer the ownership and deliver the determinate thing. So this person is the seller, okay? Because he's the one who will deliver the thing. He's the one selling the thing. So I'll give you an example. Let's say a contract of a sale of a car. In a contract of sale of a car, it is the seller who delivers the car to the buyer, right? So we're done with the first phrase. Okay, so good job. We understood that. We go to the second phrase. The other party is obligated to pay, therefore, a price certain in money or its equivalent. So when you say the other party therefore to pay a price certain in money, this person is the buyer, because the buyer pays the seller the money. So we go back to our example, a contract of sale of a car. The buyer pays the seller money. And there's another word here. It says here money or its equivalent. So that would actually pertain to a barter. Okay, I'll just lower my face down a bit so I don't disrupt the slide. Okay, so to pay a price therefore in money or its equivalent. So the word its equivalent, that means the equivalent of money. In that particular instance, it no longer becomes a contract of sale. It's a barter. Okay, so if you've heard this word before, in my experience, I heard this when I was still in grade school. Barter refers to when you pay something with another thing. Like in ancient times, for instance, you want to buy, say wood. You're going to replace it with, say, bananas. You're going to replace it with meat. So that is a contract of barter. Okay, it's not necessarily a contract of sale. Actually, it's not a contract of sale, because when you talk about a contract of sale, it's always going to be money. All right. And the last paragraph of Article 1458 is that a contract of sale may either be absolute or conditional. Okay. So when you talk about absolute sale, that means it's, in Tagalog, it's kaliwaan. Okay, so it's very simple. For instance, a contract of sale of a cell phone for 10,000 pesos. I'm going to sell to you my Android phone for 10,000 pesos. You're going to buy it from me for the amount of 10,000 pesos. So I'll give you the Android phone, then you give me the 10,000 pesos. I give you the item, you give me the money. That's it. It's absolute. Okay? And then you're done. So that's an absolute contract of sale. So we go to the other one, which is the conditional contract of sale. Here, this usually applies to a contract of sale of a parcel of land. For instance, the value of the land is, say, our real property, may it be a land, a condominium unit. Let's say it's 1 million pesos. So here, it may be difficult for the buyer to pay 1 million pesos, so we're going to do it on a staggered or installment basis. So here, the consummation of the contract of sale will happen only upon full payment of the purchase price. Okay? What does that mean? Well, it's very simple. It means that kailangan mo nang bayaran lahat ng installment basis bago magkaroon ng transfer or magkaroon ng deed of sale. So in that respect, the sale is conditional. It is conditioned upon the full payment of a purchase price. Alright? So, good job. We now go to the next slide. A contract of sale is a contract. Okay? Again, before we proceed, we must be refreshed what a contract is again. So, when you're asked what a contract of sale is, it's always best to answer it by enumerating or defining the elements of a contract of sale. So there are three necessary elements of a contract, and that is consent, object, and consideration. So I always tell my class and my students that when you're asked what a contract is, you just have to remember COC. A good acronym for that may be Clash of Clans. It used to be the #1 Android game. I'm not sure if it still is now, but there was a time that it was the #1 game in the phone. So that's Clash of Clans, or COC. Okay, so what does COC stand for? It stands for consent, object, and consideration. So what's consent? Consent meaning the parties who must be above the age of majority, meaning above the age of 18, and must not be deaf, mute, or who cannot read or write, nor insane, gave his consent to enter into that contract of sale. So ibig sabihin, kapag bata below 18, meaning 17 and below, hindi pwedeng makapasok sa isang contract of sale. Kapag naman siya ay deaf mute, who cannot read or write, hindi rin siya pwedeng pumasok sa contract of sale. O kaya kung siya ay isang baliw, hindi rin siya pwedeng makapasok or maka-enter sa contract of sale. Hindi siya makapagbigay ng consent. Okay, so that's absolutely important. So, ano ba yung consent na ibinibigay mo? Well, your consent pertains to the object of the sale. So, when you say the object, that pertains to the item being purchased. So, if it's a contract of sale of a car, the object is the car. If it is a contract of a sale of a parcel of land, it's a parcel of land. What is the consideration? The consideration is always going to be money if it's a contract of sale. Now, you can argue, what about, sir, if it's an item? Meaning you pay an item to purchase the car or to purchase the parcel of land. Well, if that's the case, that's what you call a barter already. Okay, so it's different from a contract of sale. Alright, good job remembering what a contract is. So, we now move to the next slide. Article, as 1458 states, by the contract of sale, one of the contracting parties, which is the seller, obligates himself to transfer the ownership of and to deliver a determined thing, perhaps a car, if it's a contract of sale of a car, and the other, which is the buyer, to pay their fair price certain in money or its equivalent. If it's not equivalent to money, meaning it's not money, then if it's an equivalent to money, meaning it's not money, then that's what you call a barter. Okay. When we talk about a contract of sale, a contract is, in general, we must be reminded that a contract has two obligations. Okay, so I just want you to pause right there, and then I just want you to absorb that. A contract has two obligations. A contract of sale, specifically, has two obligations. Okay, so what's the first obligation? The obligation of the first party to the second party. So, in the first paragraph of Article 1458, that talks about the obligation of the seller to deliver the item to the buyer. Okay, so that's the first obligation that we see. Now, the second obligation is on the part of the buyer to deliver money to the seller. Okay? So, if you remember your obligations and contracts, there are 5 sources of obligations, right? So that's law, contracts, quasi-contract, delict, and quasi-delicts. So, the basis of the obligation here is based on contract, specifically a contract of sale. So what are the characteristics of a contract of sale? So it may be consensual, meaning that the contract is perfected by mere consent. Now, what is perfection? Well, perfection means that the contract is born. So the moment na nagbigay kayo ng consent sa isa't isa tungkol dun sa kontrata ninyo, a contract is already born. Okay? So basta nagbigay kayo ng consent, pinanganak na yung kontrata. Okay? Basta nag-agree kayo, may kontrata na. With respect, again, ulitin ko, basta nag-agree kayo, that's consent, with respect to the object and the consideration, o kung magkano man yung object, that's already a contract. Okay? COC. Consent, object, and consideration. Number 2, bilateral. Both contracting parties are bound to fulfill their obligations reciprocally to one another. Number 3, it's onerous because the thing sold is conveyed in consideration of the price and vice versa. Number 4, it's commutative because the thing sold is considered the equivalent of the price paid. Number 5, it's nominate because it has a special name. That is, it's a contract of sale. So I just want to pause right here and explain to you what nominate contracts are and vis-a-vis yung in-nominate contracts. And to tell you honestly, I remember when I was studying law school, nalitong-lito ako dito. Pero napakasimple lang pala ang ibig sabihin ng nominate. Ang ibig sabihin ng nominate ay may pangalan talaga siya. Kasi maraming mga klaseng kontrata na wala talagang pangalan. Kahit sa practice, ang tawag lang namin sa, halimbawa, papagawa ko ng client ko ng isang agreement, wala naman siya sa, kumbaga, walang specific provision yung civil code or specific chapter yung civil code for that particular contract. I just call it a memorandum of agreement, which is still it's a contract. Okay? So, kapag sinabi mong nominate, may specific na pangalan siya. And in this case, ang tawag sa kanya ay contract of sale. So, number 6, principal. It does not depend on the validity of another contract. Ang opposite ng principal is an accessory contract. So, ang pinakamagandang example ng accessory contract ay isang contract of mortgage. Ang isang contract of mortgage nag-i-exist lamang kapag ito ay nakasabit sa principal contract niya, which is a contract of loan. Okay, so kung hindi kayo familiar dyan, explain ko lang napakabilis. Halimbawa si A, nagpautang siya kay B ng 1 million pesos. Okay, so si A, hindi naman niya basta-basta papautangin si B ng walang security o wala siyang kasiguraduhan na mababayaran siya. Ang tawag natin dyan sa law is called security. Pero sa totoong buhay, talaga namang yun din talaga siya, security. Kasiguraduhan na mababayaran siya kapag come due date, hindi nakapag-produce ng pangbayad yung kanyang pinautangan. So, ano ba yung security madalas sa isang contract of loan? Well, pwedeng sasakyan, pwedeng lupa. Ngayon, ang ginagawa nila dyan, sinasabit nila yan dun sa contract of loan. Kapag ito ay sasakyan, ang tawag mo dyan ay chattel mortgage. Kapag ito naman ay real property, kagaya ng kagaya ng lupa, condo, bahay, building, ang tawag mo naman dun ay real estate mortgage. So, paano ang epekto niyan? Napakasimple lang. Halimbawa, ang due date ng kontrata is 1 year. So, after 1 year, dapat magbayad na yung pinautangan ng kanyang loan o yung kanyang inutang. Siyempre, may kasamang interest yon kung nag-agree sila dun sa interest rate. Pag hindi niya nabayaran yon, ang gagawin ngayon yung nagpautang is pwede niyang benta. Humingi siya ng tulong sa korte, tapos mag-o-order ang court na ibenta ang property. So, saan ibebenta yung property? Sa isang public auction. Okay, so naka-attend na rin naman ako ng public auction na kagaya nito dati kasi may isa akong kliyente na nakautang sa bangko at hindi siya nakapagbayad. So, in-auction yung kanyang property. So, dun sa public auction, may mga bidders doon. Ngayon, kung sino man yung highest bidder o yung pinakamataas na nag-bid, sa kanya mapupunta yung property. Ngayon, yung binayad niya, ang amount na binayad ng buyer, gagamitin upang isatisfy yung loan obligation ng may-ari ng property dun sa pinagkakautangan niya. Tapos kung may balanse or may sobra dun sa pera na binayad ng buyer dun sa public auction, yung sobra na yun mapupunta doon sa may-ari sa original na may-ari ng bahay. Okay? So, syempre ayaw mong mangyari yan kasi kadalasan yung bidding price napakababa kumpara doon sa fair market value ng property. Kaya ayaw mong ma-foreclose yung property mo. Okay, pasensya na kayo, natagalan tayo dun sa principal ha. I just wanted you to understand yung konsepto ng mortgage. Okay? So, nandito na tayo, 2 kinds of sale. Ito, sale, absolute, sale is not subject to any condition whatsoever. The ownership passes to the buyer upon the delivery of the things sold. Kakadiscuss ko lang nito kanina. Napakasimple niyan, kaliwaan. Benta ko sa'yo cellphone ko, 10,000. O, bilhin mo yung cellphone. Bayaran mo ako ng 10,000. Tapos kaliwaan na tayo. Bali, ganun lang kasimple. Ngayon, ang conditional naman is may kondisyon na kailangan ma-meet. So, kadalasan, ang sabi dito, the sale contemplates a contingency. The contract is subject to certain conditions, usually the full payment of the purchase price. Delivery does not immediately transfer ownership until the condition is fulfilled. So, kadalasan nangyayari yan sa contract of sale on installment basis. Ngayon, ang transfer ng property mangyayari lang kapag bayad na, fully paid na. Okay? Next slide tayo. Article 49, the thing must be licit and the vendor must have the right to transfer ownership thereof at the time it is delivered. So when you say illicit, that means good or lawful. Ano ba ang opposite ng licit? Well, that's illicit. Okay? So remember that an object of a contract must not be contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy. If the subject matter is illicit, meaning illegal, the contract is void. So ano ba yung example ng mga illicit objects? Well, a contract of sale of illegal drugs, okay? Dapat illegal drugs yan, hindi pwedeng drugs lang. Kasi syempre, may mga droga din naman na nabibili sa mercury drug na legal eh. Like paracetamol, that's a drug. Diba? Pero pag sinabi mong heroin, sinabi mong sabu, cocaine, illegal yon. Okay? So, hindi siya pwedeng maging object ng contract of sale. O kaya, a contract to kill someone in exchange for money. So, dyan napapasok yung mga assassin. Diba? So, sa Pilipinas pa may maganyan? Oo naman. Meron, maraming ganyan dito sa Pilipinas. Pero yung binabayad sa kanila, napakaliit lang para tumumba ng tao. Yan ang realidad. Okay? So, yung ganyang klaseng kontrata, illegal pa rin yan. Okay? Next, the right to vendor to transfer ownership. The general rules, the vendor can only sell what he owns. Nobody can dispose of that which he does not have. Natural lang naman. Paano ka magbibenta ng isang bagay na hindi mo pag-aari? Okay? Pero may exception dyan. Article 1459, however, does not require that the vendor must have the right to transfer ownership of the property sold at the time of the perfection of the contract. It is sufficient that the seller has the right to sell the thing at the time when the ownership is to pass. So, ang example niyan is a car subject to a buy and sell business. So, for instance, may isang tao, ang negosyo niya is buy and sell. So, ngayon, ang kotse, nabili niya na dun sa isa pang tao. Okay? So, halimbawa, sabihin natin, si A, nasa negosyo siya ng buy and sell. Bumili na siya ng car kay B. Pero yung kanyang, yung sasakyan niya, hindi pa napupunta sa kanya, hindi pa na-deliver. Pero, habang hindi pa na-deliver sa kanya yung sasakyan, binenta niya na kay C. Okay? So, at the time na binenta niya kay C, hindi pa naman siya yung absolute owner ng sasakyan. O, valid ba yung contract? Ang sabi, pwede naman, valid. Basta ang importante, he must have the right to transfer ownership at the time of the perfection of the contract. Okay? So, nandito tayo sa Article 1459. Teka ha, ito double check ko yan. Saka lang sigurado tayo. 1459. Okay. Okay, i-correct natin ito ha. The ownership does not require that the property must have the right to transfer ownership of the property sold at the time of the perfection. It is sufficient. Okay? So, i-highlight ko lang to at must have the right. Does not require that the vendor must have the right to transfer ownership at the time of the tatanggalin ko yung highlight natin dito kasi hindi yun yung importante. Ang importante is ito. It is sufficient that the seller has the right to sell the thing when the ownership is to pass. So, ang ibig sabihin yan, hindi importante na doon sa perfection, siya yung may-ari. Basta doon sa consummation or sa delivery date, doon siya kailangan maging may-ari. Okay? Ayan, napakaganda. So, ano ba yung perfection na yan? Okay, so it's part of the stages in a contract. So, babalik lang muna tayo sa oblicon, mabilis lang. What are the stages in a contract? So, tatlo lang yan. Una, yung preparation o yung negotiation stage. Diyan yung nagtatawaran kayo. Tapos yung number 2, yan na yung perfection stage. Diyan na kayo nag-agree kung magkano ba yung item, tsaka kung ano yung item at magkano ba yung item. At number 3, yan yung fulfillment or determination of the contract. So, yan na yung delivery ng item tsaka full payment ng purchase price. So, hindi kailangan na dun sa perfection siya na kaagad yung may-ari. Basta kailangan dun sa delivery date or yung number 3, consummation stage, kailangan dun siya owner ng property. Okay? Next slide tayo. 1459 states that you don't necessarily have to be the owner of the things to be sold during the perfection stage, just as long as you have the object at your disposal during the consummation or the delivery stage of the contract. That's correct. Next slide. A thing is determinate when it's particularly designated or physically segregated from all others of the same class. So a thing is determinate if it's identified by its individuality. For example, my car. So that's one of a kind. A thing is determinate if it's identified by its individuality. Okay, the watch that I am wearing, the house in the corner of Rizal and Del Pilar Street. So these are one of a kind. So actually, example na my car can be treated as can be specified a little bit more, especially kung mayaman ka at marami kang sasakyan. Kung marami kang sasakyan, pwedeng ang treatment mo dyan ay generic pa rin. Pero kung isa lang talaga yung sasakyan mo, specific yon, specific car. Okay, kasi wala, one of a kind lang yung nag-iisa. Isa lang naman yung sasakyan mo. Okay? 1461, things having potential existence may be the object of a contract of sale. The efficacy of a sale or mere hope or expectancy is deemed subject to the condition that the thing will come into existence. And the sale of vain hope or expectancy is void. Okay, i-discuss ko to, napakabilis lang. Things having potential existence may be the object of a contract of sale. So, yung pinakamagandang halimbawa dyan is, halimbawa, yung mami ko, nasa negosyo siya ng farming ng palay. Pwede siya magbenta ng palay kahit na hindi pa ito nakaka-harvest. Okay? Kasi potential pa lang yung existence eh. So, pwede na siya mag-enter ng contract of sale sa kanyang mga buyers kahit wala pa yung harvest season. Okay? So, ibig sabihin yung mga palay ano pa lang, nandun pa sa rice field. Okay? The efficacy of sale of mere hope or expectancy is deemed subject to the condition that the thing will come into existence. So, ang example nito is ang sale of mere hope. Lagi itong tinatanong ha. Para lang kayo maliwanagan. Pag sinabing the sale of mere hope can be, kumari, yung question dyan is usually true or false eh. A sale of mere hope is void. Ang sagot is no, it's valid. So, kapag ikaw ay nagbenta ng mere hope or expectancy, subject to the condition that the thing will come into existence, valid yan. Halimbawa, yung mga bumili ka ng lotto ticket, okay? So, bumili ka ng ticket na may pag-asang manalo. Yun yung, actually, ganoon lang kasimple yun. Okay? Sale of hope, mere hope or expectancy. Valid yan. Ang void dyan is yung sale of vain hope. Meaning, wala ka na talaga pag-asa manalo. Halimbawa, ikaw ay nagbenta ng ticket. Usually, ang pinakamagandang example nito yung mga pamangkin mo na sinasabi nila na may fare. O, uncle, o tita, may fare dun sa amin. Bili ka naman ng ticket, 100 pesos. O, ikaw naman, sabi mo, sige na nga, 500, o, pili ako. So, yung 5 tickets mo at 100 pesos each, sometimes, tapos na pala yung raffle. Meaning, nagkaroon na ng awarding dun sa raffle, binibenta lang sa'yo ng pamangkin mo para magkakota, hindi mo naman alam na tapos na pala. So, alam naman natin na hindi ikaw yung nanalo o hindi yung ticket mo yung nanalo. So, nung binili mo yung raffle ticket na yun, wala ka na talagang pag-asang manalo. So, vain yung hope mo na manalo doon. Okay? So, yan. yun yung void. Okay? Pero kapag bumili ka ng ticket sa lotto, valid yun. Kung void yun, bakit i-allow ng government, di ba? So, valid yun. Okay? May questions ako dito. Pwede nyo to sagutin. Kung hindi nyo siya nasagot ngayon, pwede nyo gawin is rewind nyo yung video, panoorin nyo. Tapos, ang aking suggestion is basahin nyo yung topic, yung libro. Okay? Para ma-augment. Kasi nothing replaces yung reading. Okay? So, I guess with that, we're done with slide 1. And thank you very much for attending class. Okay? Bye now.